The coal dust didn't just coat your skin in the black hollow mines. It coated your soul. It was a living, breathing thing that tasted of sulfur and ancient compressed death. For the 3,000 workers who toiled in the deep shafts, the dust was a curse. But for Kaia, it was the only thing keeping her children alive. 5 years ago, Kaia had fled the royal palace with nothing but the clothes on her back and a belly full of royal airs. She had run from the silk sheets and the golden goblets to the one place she knew the high-born wolves would never look, the bottom of the world, the coal mines. Here, in the suffocating dark, she had given birth on a bed of burlap sacks. Here she had raised 3 sons who had never seen the sun. And here, every single morning, she committed a crime against the crown. She took the soot, the filth, and the grime, and she used it to paint over the most precious bloodline in the kingdom. She hid the silver hair of the winter bloodline under layers of black dust. She hid the ice-blue eyes of the Alpha King behind scratched welding goggles. She taught 3 princes that they were nothing but rats in the wall. But secrets are like coal seams. You can bury them deep. You can pile mountains of rock on top of them. But eventually, the pressure builds. Eventually, a spark finds a pocket of gas. And when it does, the explosion doesn't just clear the air, it brings the whole mountain down. "Wake up, little mice, the monster is hungry." Kaia whispered the words into the darkness of the cramped storage closet they called home. It was located in the deepest sector of Shaft 4, a place where the ventilation hummed like a dying insect and the heat was oppressive. 3 small lumps under a gray wool blanket stirred. "Mama," a sleepy voice croaked. It was Torin, the eldest by 2 minutes. "Is it morning?" "There is no morning down here, baby," Kaia said softly, pulling the blanket back. "Just the shift whistle. Up now, quick like shadows." 3 boys sat up, Torin, Titus, and Talon. They were 5 years old, skinny from rationing, and pale as ghosts beneath the streaks of yesterday's grime. But even in the dim light of the lantern, they were breathtaking. Their hair, messy and long, shimmered with a metallic silver sheen that defied the darkness. It was the mark of the Frost line, the mark of the king. "Come here," Kaia commanded, dipping her hands into a bucket of fresh coal dust she had collected from the crusher. It was fine, powdery, and oily. The boys lined up obediently. They hated this part, but they didn't complain. They knew the rules. Kaia took a handful of the black powder and rubbed it vigorously into Torin's hair. She matted down the silver, dulling the shine until his hair looked like dirty straw. She did the same to Titus, and then to Talon, the smallest and most mischievous of the trio. "It itches," Talon whispered, wrinkling his nose. "I know," Kaia said, her heart breaking a little as she smeared the soot onto his forehead and cheeks. "But the dust protects us. The dust makes us invisible." Next came the goggles. They were oversized, scavenged from dead miners with thick tinted lenses. "Eyes covered," Kaia ordered. The boys pulled the straps over their heads. The goggles hid their most dangerous feature, their eyes. They didn't have the brown or green eyes of the common workers. They had the winter blood eyes, irises of shattered ice, pale blue and piercing, glowing with a faint, bioluminescent light in the dark. If a guard saw those eyes, Kaia would be executed before she could draw a breath. And the boys. She didn't want to think about what Lady Sybil would do to the boys. "Goggles on," Titus confirmed, adjusting the strap. "Good," Kaia said, wiping her hands on her apron. "Now, the golden rule." The three boys straightened up, looking like tiny, soot-covered soldiers. They recited it in unison, their voices a hushed whisper. "In the dark, we are mice. Mice do not speak. Mice do not fight. Mice stay in the walls." "Perfect." Kaia kissed each of their dirty foreheads. "Now stay here. I have to go to the crusher. I'll bring back hardtack for breakfast." She turned to the heavy iron door, but before she could touch the latch, the air in the mine changed. Clang, clang, clang. It wasn't the shift whistle, it was the emergency klaxon. But it wasn't the rhythmic pulse of a cave-in. It was a rapid, frantic ringing that signaled a lockdown. The door to their closet burst open. Old Man Miller, the one-legged foreman who knew their secret and accepted Kaia's extra shifts in exchange for silence, stood there, his face pale beneath the soot. "Kaia," Miller hissed, "you can't go to the crusher." "What is it?" Kaia asked, pulling the boys behind her. "Gas leak?" "Worse." Miller shook his head, his eyes wide with fear. "Royalty." "A surprise inspection. They sealed the main lift." Kaia's blood turned to ice. "Who? Is it the tax collector?" "No," Miller whispered, looking over his shoulder. "It's him, the king. Stellan Frost is here." Kaia felt the room spin. Stellan. Here. In the mines. He never came to the mines. He hated the underground. He was a creature of the snow and the sky. Why would he descend into the dark? "He's looking for the rebellion leaders," Miller explained quickly. "He's tearing apart Sector 4. He's heading for the foreman's office right now to check the ledgers." "The office?" Kaia gasped. "Miller, the office is right next to this closet. The walls are paper thin." "I know you have to move them," Miller urged. "If he smells pups, if he hears them." Kaia didn't need to be told twice. Her survival instincts, honed by 5 years of terror, kicked into overdrive. "Boys," Kaia whispered, her voice trembling but authoritative. "Game time. The silent game, the hardest level we've ever played." She grabbed them and ran out of the closet, following Miller down the narrow corridor toward the main office. The sound of heavy boots echoed from the main shaft. The King's Guard. They were close. In there, Kaia pointed to the ventilation grate high on the wall of the foreman's office. It was a defunct shaft, clogged with old filters, but it was deep enough to hide 3 small bodies. Miller boosted the boys up. Kaia shoved them into the dark, dusty hole one by one. "Listen to me," Kaia whispered fiercely, grabbing Torin's hand through the grate. "Do not move. Do not breathe. The big wolf is here. If he hears you, the game is over. Do you understand?" Torin nodded, his goggled eyes wide with fear behind the glass. He pulled his brothers deeper into the shadows. Kaia quickly replaced the grate. She grabbed a rotting tapestry, a faded banner of the mining guild, and hung it over the vent to conceal it. "Go," Miller hissed. "Get to the sorting line. Blend in." Kaia ran. She made it out of the office and into the adjacent sorting bay just as the heavy double doors of the corridor were kicked open. She grabbed a shovel and bent over the conveyor belt, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She kept her head down, praying to a moon goddess she hadn't spoken to in years. Please, let him be quick. Let him be blind. Back in the foreman's office, the silence was shattered. Alpha King Stellan Frost walked into the room. He did not look like a man who belonged in a mine. He was a giant, standing nearly 7 feet tall, clad in armor made of white dragon scale and silver fur. His presence sucked the heat out of the room. Frost formed on the windows of the office as he passed. He was terrifyingly beautiful. His hair was a stark, shimmering silver, tied back in a warrior's knot. His face was sharp, angular, and cruel, but it was his eyes, those winter blood eyes, that froze the soul. They were glowing with a cold blue fire, scanning the room for threats. He was flanked by 4 elite guards, but Stellan didn't need protection. He radiated a power so immense that the wood of the desk seemed to groan under the pressure of his aura. "Where are the ledgers?" Stellan demanded. His voice was a deep baritone that vibrated through the walls. It was the voice of a man who had never asked for anything twice. Miller, who had stayed behind to face the king, bowed so low his nose touched the dirty floor. "Here, Your Majesty," Miller stammered, pointing to the stack of books on the desk. "Everything is in order. We extract the coal, we ship it." "I don't care about the coal, old man," Stellan growled, stripping off his white gloves and tossing them onto the dusty desk. "I care about the silver that's being skimmed off the top to fund these freedom fighters. I care about the rats in my basement." Stellan began to tear through the office. He flipped the desk over with one hand. Crash! He ripped paintings off the walls. He was looking for hidden safes, for secret compartments. Inside the ventilation shaft, 10 feet up the wall, the 3 boys were huddled together in the pitch black. It was hot. It was dusty. When Stellan flipped the desk, a massive cloud of ancient coal dust puffed up into the air. The ventilation system, weak as it was, sucked the cloud right into the intake vent where the boys were hiding. The dust swirled around them. It coated their throats. It tickled their noses. Titus buried his face in his knees. Torin pinched his nose shut, but Talon, poor, small Talon, couldn't get his hand up in time. The dust tickled the back of his nasal cavity. It was an irresistible, primal urge. Talon's eyes watered behind his goggles. He tried to hold it. His chest hitched. "Ha ha! Ho!" Down below, Stellan paused. He stood in the center of the wrecked office, his back to the tapestry. "This mine is a disease," Stellan muttered to his guards. "Burn the records. We start fresh." "Yes, sire," the guard replied. Stellan turned to leave. Up in the vent, Talon lost the battle. Achoo, achoo, achoo. The sound was small, muffled by the metal ductwork, but it was distinct. It wasn't a normal sneeze. A normal sneeze was a singular explosion or a messy, wet sound. This was different. It was a triple-beat staccato. Snap, snap, snap. It sounded like a whip cracking 3 times in rapid succession. It was a genetic rhythmic quirk, a contraction of the diaphragm that only occurred in one specific bloodline, the winter bloodline. King Stellan Frost froze. He stopped mid-stride, one boot raised. The room went deathly silent. The guards looked at the king, confused. "Sire?" one guard asked. "Did you hear a rat?" Stellan didn't answer. He slowly lowered his boot. He turned around. His face was no longer angry. It was masked of pure, bewildered shock. His heart, usually a slow, steady drum, skipped a beat. He knew that sound. He heard that sound every morning when he looked in the mirror and the cold air hit his nose. He heard that sound when his father was alive. He heard that sound in the history books described as the thunder of the frost. It was the royal sneeze, and it had just come from the wall. Stellan's glowing blue eyes locked onto the rotting tapestry hanging askew on the back wall. He inhaled. Beneath the stench of sulfur, coal, and unwashed miners, he smelled it, faint, buried, but there, milk, fear, and winter. "Sire?" the guard asked again, reaching for his weapon. "Is there an assassin?" Stellan raised a hand, silencing him. He walked toward the tapestry. He moved slowly, as if he were approaching a ghost. "That sound," Stellan whispered, his voice trembling for the first time in 5 years. "Who made that sound?" There was no answer from the wall, only a terrified silence. Stellan reached the tapestry. He gripped the moldy fabric in his massive fist. "Tear it down," Stellan commanded, his voice rising to a roar. "Tear it all down!" He ripped the tapestry from the wall, exposing the rusted iron grate of the ventilation shaft. And there, staring back at him from the darkness, were 3 pairs of goggles. 3 small soot-covered faces, frozen in terror. And one of them was sniffing, fighting back a 4th sneeze. The iron grate hit the floor with a deafening clang that echoed through the small, ruined office like a funeral bell. King Stellan Frost stood amidst the wreckage of the overturned desk, his chest heaving, his breath visible in the freezing aura that radiated from his armor. He stared into the dark. Square hole in the wall. 3 small figures tumbled out, landing in a heap of soot and limbs on the dirty floor. They coughed, scrambling to untangle themselves, instinctively pressing their backs against the wall, trying to make themselves as small as possible. They looked like creatures born of the shadow. They were covered head to toe in black dust. Their clothes were rags, stitched together from old potato sacks and discarded uniforms. On their faces, they wore oversized, scratched welding goggles that made them look like terrifying little insects. But Stellan wasn't looking at their clothes. He was looking at the way they moved. They didn't scramble like rats. They moved with a synchronized, fluid grace that was unnervingly familiar. They huddled together, the 2 slightly larger ones instantly flanking the smaller one, the one who had sneezed, forming a protective phalanx. It was a defensive formation, a wolf formation. Stellan took a step forward. The floorboards groaned under his weight. "Don't move," he commanded. His voice was a low rumble, not of anger, but of a terrifying, dawn-breaking realization. The boys froze. They remembered the golden rule. Mice do not speak. Mice do not move. They held their breath, their small chests hitching. Stellan knelt. For a man of his size, a warrior who had crushed rebellions and slain dragons, the movement was surprisingly gentle. He ignored the guards who were hovering with their hands on their swords. He ignored the foreman, Miller, who was shaking in the corner. He reached out a hand. His fingers were gloved in white leather, now stained with the coal dust of the room. He reached for the boy in the middle, Titus. Titus flinched, turning his head away, but he didn't run. He couldn't run. The Alpha's presence pinned him in place like gravity. Stellan's hand hovered for a moment, trembling. Then he hooked a finger under the strap of the boy's goggles. "Let me see," Stellan whispered. "Let me see the lie." He pulled the goggles up. The coal dust had coated the boy's face like a mask, leaving only the area around his eyes clean. When the goggles lifted, the contrast was blinding. Stellan stopped breathing. Staring back at him were 2 eyes made of shattered ice. They were not merely blue, they were the winter blue, a color so pale, so luminous, it looked like starlight, trapped in a glacier. It was a color that existed in only one family tree in the entire history of the wolf kind. Stellan looked into those eyes, and he felt like he was looking into a mirror from 20 years ago. "By the ancients," Stellan choked out. He shifted his gaze to the boy on the left. He ripped the goggles off. Winter blue. He looked at the boy on the right. The sneezer. He gently lifted the goggles. Winter blue. 3 of them. 3 perfect, identical copies of the king, staring up at him with terrified, wide eyes. Stellan reached out and touched Titus's hair. It was matted with grease and soot, black as the mine itself. Stellan rubbed a lock of hair between his thumb and forefinger, grinding the dirt away. Underneath the black filth, a single strand of hair shone in the dim light. It was silver, pure metallic silver. The room spun. Stellan fell back onto his heels, his mind reeling. For 5 years he had walked the halls of his ice palace alone. He had sat on the throne believing he was the last leaf on a dying tree. He had believed the frost line would end with him. And all this time, while he slept in silk, his blood, his own flesh, had been sleeping in coal dust. "Who?" Stellan whispered, looking at the boys. "Who put you here?" The boys didn't answer. They pressed their lips together, their eyes darting to the door. Stellan's shock began to curdle into something else, something hot and dangerous. Rage. Someone had hidden them. Someone had stolen 3 princes of the realm and buried them in a pit. "Who is keeping you?" Stellan roared, his voice cracking the plaster on the ceiling. "Get away from them!" The scream came from the doorway. It was a feral, desperate sound, more animal than human. Stellan turned his head just as a blur of motion launched itself at him. It was a woman. She was small, covered in the same coal dust as the children, wearing a torn miner's apron and heavy boots. In her hands, she wielded a rusted, jagged pickaxe. She didn't hesitate. She didn't care that he was the king. She didn't care that he was 7 feet of armored death. She swung the pickaxe at his head with the intent to kill. "Mama!" The triplets screamed in unison. Stellan didn't flinch. His warrior reflexes, honed by a lifetime of combat, took over. He raised his left hand. Clang! He caught the shaft of the pickaxe inches from his face. The force of the blow was impressive. She was strong, fueled by hysterical maternal adrenaline, but against an Alpha Prime, it was nothing. He held the weapon fast. He looked at the attacker. She was panting, her teeth bared, her eyes wild and terrified. Her hair was hidden under a rag, her face smeared with soot. But then the scent hit him. It had been masked by the sulfur of the mine. It had been buried under the smell of sweat and fear. But now that she was close, now that her heat was radiating against his armor, the mask crumbled. Vanilla, ash, and snowdrops. The memory hit Stellan harder than the pickaxe. He was back in the palace 5 years ago. He was burning with the fever of the assassin's poison. He was dying, and there was a cool hand on his forehead, a soft voice singing him back from the edge. A woman he had mated with in the delirium of survival, a woman whose face he had never clearly seen because of the fever, but whose scent was burned into his soul. She hadn't been a spy. She hadn't been a thief. "Kaia," Stellan whispered. The woman froze. Her grip on the pickaxe faltered. She looked at him, her chest heaving. "Let them go," she hissed. "Take me, hang me, but let them go." Stellan ripped the pickaxe from her hands and tossed it aside. It clattered into the corner. He reached out and grabbed her by the shoulders. He wasn't gentle. He pulled her close, staring into her soot-stained face. He saw the familiarity in the shape of her jaw, the fire in her eyes. "You," Stellan growled, the betrayal of 5 years ago resurfacing, mixing with the shock of the present. You are the one who ran. You took the royal seal." "I took nothing," Kaia spat back, struggling against his grip. "I took my life." Stellan looked past her, at the three silver-haired boys huddled against the wall. "You took more than your life." Stellan's voice dropped to a dangerous, icy whisper. "You took my sons." He released her, stepping back, as if her touch burned him. He gestured wildly at the children. "You stole the heirs to the throne. You hid them in a hole in the ground. Do you have any idea what you have done? They are princes. They should have been sleeping in the Winter Tower, not here, covered in filth." "They are alive!" Kaia screamed, stepping between the king and the boys, spreading her arms to shield them. "That is more than they would be if I had stayed." "I would have protected them!" Stellan roared, his alpha aura flaring, causing the lights in the office to flicker. "I am the king. I would have given them the world." "You couldn't even protect yourself," Kaia yelled back. The silence of the mine amplified her voice. "You were poisoned in your own bed, Stellan. You were dying, and the people who did it were standing right next to you." Stellan froze. "What are you talking about? Why do you think I ran?" Kaia was crying now, the tears cutting clean tracks through the coal dust on her cheeks. "I didn't run because I was a spy. I ran because she told me that if I was still in the castle by sunrise, she would cut the pups out of my belly and feed them to the hounds." "She?" Stellan asked, his blood running cold. "Who?" Kaia raised a shaking finger. She pointed past Stellan toward the doorway where the royal entourage had gathered. Standing there, flanked by the elite guard, was Lady Sybil, the king's spy master, the woman who had nursed Stellan after Kaia vanished, the woman who had sworn that Kaia was a traitor. Sybil stood in the doorway, her face pale. She was looking at the three boys. She was looking at the silver hair that Stellan had revealed. She was looking at the undeniable proof of her treason. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the hum of the ventilation and the ragged breathing of the king. Stellan turned slowly to look at Sybil. "Sybil," Stellan said, his voice calm, which was far more terrifying than his shouting. "Is this true?" Sybil's eyes darted around the room. She calculated the odds. She looked at the king, who was still processing the shock. She looked at the mother, who was ready to kill. She smiled. It was a thin, reptile smile. "Sire," Sybil said smoothly, stepping back into the shadows of the corridor, "the woman is clearly mad. Coal madness. It affects the mind. She kidnapped 3 orphans and dyed their hair. They have the sneeze." "Sybil," Stellan said, stepping toward her, "they have the eyes. Do not lie to me." Sybil stopped smiling. She saw the murder in the king's eyes. She knew her time as the shadow behind the throne was over, unless the throne was empty. "I tried to spare you the complications, Stellan." Sybil sighed, her hand drifting to the signal flare on her belt. "A maid's bastard offspring. It pollutes the bloodline. I did it for the purity of the kingdom." "You tried to kill my children," Stellan snarled. The temperature in the room plummeted. Ice began to crackle along the walls. "And I failed," Sybil admitted. She pulled the pin on the flare and dropped it. Red smoke hissed out, filling the corridor. "Kill them," Sybil commanded to the shadows. "Kill them all, even the king." From the darkness of the mine shaft, figures emerged. Not the royal guard. These were mercenaries, men in dark armor wearing the crest of the snake, Sybil's private house. They had been waiting. Traitors! Stellan roared, drawing his sword, a blade of clear diamond-hard ice that he summoned from thin air. But there were too many of them. Crossbow bolts whistled through the smoke. Thwack! A bolt slammed into Stellan's shoulder plate, shattering against the dragon scale. "Kaia!" Stellan shouted, spinning around. "Get them out! Now!" Kaia didn't argue. She grabbed Torin and Titus. "Talon, hold my belt!" "The lift is blocked!" Miller shouted, grabbing a wrench to defend himself. "They control the main shaft." "Not the lift!" Kaia yelled, dragging the boys toward a dark, narrow opening in the back of the office that had been boarded up. "The rat tunnels!" She kicked the rotting boards away, revealing a hole barely big enough for a man to crawl through. "Go!" Kaia shoved the boys in. She turned to look at Stellan. He was holding the doorway, his ice sword flashing, holding back a tide of assassins. "Stellan!" she screamed. "You can't fight them all. Come with us." Stellan decapitated a mercenary with a backhanded swing. He looked at the narrow hole. He looked at his armor. He looked at his dignity. Then he looked at his sons, disappearing into the dark. He roared, summoning a wall of thick ice to block the office doorway. It would hold for maybe a minute. He turned and sprinted toward Kaia. "Lead the way," Stellan commanded, breathless. Kaia dove into the hole. Stellan followed, squeezing his massive frame into the suffocating darkness of the earth, leaving his kingdom behind to save the only thing that mattered. The chase had begun, and this time the king was the mouse. The ice wall Stellan had summoned was a masterpiece of elemental magic, a shimmering barrier of diamond-hard frost that sealed the office doorway. But even magic has its limits against brute force and high explosives. Boom! The impact shuddered through the rock floor. Dust rained down from the low ceiling of the rat tunnel, coating Stellan's hair in a fresh layer of gray. "They are breaching," Stellan grunted, his voice tight with strain. He was on his hands and knees, crawling behind Kaia and the children in a tunnel that was barely 3 feet high. For Kaia and the boys, the space was cramped but navigable. For Stellan Frost, the Alpha King, who stood 7 feet tall in his boots, it was a suffocating nightmare. His broad shoulders scraped against the rough-hewn rock with every movement. His dragon-scale armor, designed for open battlefields and throne rooms, was catching on every root and jagged stone. "We have to move faster," Kaia whispered from the darkness ahead. She didn't look back. She was counting the turns in her head, navigating a labyrinth that wasn't on any official map. If they get to the junction before us, they can cut the ventilation. "I am moving!" Stellan hissed. He reached up and unbuckled his massive shoulder pauldrons. He let the priceless white steel drop into the dirt behind him. Next came his cape, then the ornamental breastplate. He shed the symbols of his station piece by piece, leaving a trail of royal debris in the dirt, lightening his load to become something more essential, a father trying to keep up with his cubs. "Titus, keep your head down," Stellan ordered gently, reaching out to guide the boy's head away from a low-hanging stalactite. "Are you a giant?" Talon asked, his voice trembling as he crawled just ahead of Stellan's nose. "No," Stellan said, the ghost of a smile touching his lips despite the danger. "I am just oversized. Keep moving, little wolf." They crawled for what felt like miles, though it was likely only a few hundred yards. The air grew hotter, thicker. The smell of sulfur was replaced by the stale metallic scent of old copper and stagnant water. These were the rat tunnels, the illegal shafts dug by desperate miners looking for veins the company had missed. They were unstable, unmapped, and deadly. "Stop," Kaia signaled, holding up a fist. They had reached a widening in the tunnel. It wasn't a room, it was a fissure. The floor simply dropped away into a black abyss, stretching 10 feet across to the other side where the tunnel continued. A single, rotting wooden plank bridged the gap. "The devil's throat," Kaia murmured. She looked at the plank. It was warped and covered in slick moss. "I usually carry them across one by one, but we don't have time." From the tunnel behind them, the sound of shouting grew louder. The mercenaries had broken through the ice wall. They were in the shaft. "I can jump it," Torin said, trying to sound brave, though his knees were knocking together. "No," Stellan said, rising to a crouch in the slightly higher ceiling of the fissure. "No jumping. Not today." He stepped past the boys, testing the edge of the chasm. He looked at the rotting plank and kicked it into the abyss. It tumbled silently into the dark, vanishing without a sound. "That wood would have snapped under a rat's weight," Stellan muttered. He turned to the boys. He knelt on one knee, opening his arms. "Come here," he commanded. The triplets hesitated. They looked at Kaia. "Go!" Kaia nodded, her eyes fierce. "He is strong." Torin, Titus, and Talon scrambled into Stellan's arms. He scooped them up as if they weighed nothing, gathering all three against his chest. They clung to his tunic, their small, coal-stained hands gripping the fabric tightly. For a moment, Stellan just held them. He felt 3 tiny hearts hammering against his own ribs. Thump, thump, thump. It was a rhythm that synced perfectly with his own. He smelled the coal dust, yes, but beneath it he smelled the bloodline. Winter, ice, iron. "Hold on," Stellan whispered into their hair. He didn't use the plank. He didn't use magic. He used the alpha strength that was his birthright. Stellan coiled his muscles and leaped. He soared over the 10-foot gap, a massive shadow flying through the dark. He landed on the other side with a heavy thud, his boots digging into the rock to arrest his momentum. He didn't stumble. He didn't sway. He was as solid as the mountain itself. He set the boys down gently. "Whoa!" Talon breathed, staring up at him with wide, goggled eyes. "Did you fly?" "Wolves don't fly," Stellan corrected, brushing a smudge of dirt from Talon's nose. "We leap." Kaia jumped the gap a second later, landing lightly on the balls of her feet. She looked at Stellan, seeing the way he hovered over the boys, shielding them from the draft of the abyss. "You handled them well," Kaia said, her voice guarded but softer than before. "I have had 5 years to imagine it," Stellan replied, his eyes locking with hers. There was a wealth of pain in that look, years of mourning a family he didn't know he had. "Why didn't you send word, a letter, a signal? And risk Sybil intercepting it?" Kaia shook her head, turning back to the tunnel. "I chose life, Stellan. Silence was the price." "They are here!" a voice shouted from the tunnel behind them. A beam of flashlight cut through the gloom, dancing across the ceiling of the fissure. "Move!" Stellan barked. They ran. The tunnel widened enough for them to stand upright now, but the ground was treacherous, loose shale and sharp rocks. "We need to get to the junction," Kaia panted, leading the way. "There's an old service elevator. It's rusted. But the manual pulley still works. It leads to the ventilation output on the surface." "Is it far?" Stellan asked, bringing up the rear, his sword, now a physical blade of steel he had snatched from a fallen mercenary, drawn and ready. 5 minutes, Kaia said, but 5 minutes in a collapsing mine is a lifetime. Suddenly, the ground beneath them shook. Not a natural tremor. An explosion. Boom! Dust poured from the ceiling. The lights that had been strung along the walls flickered and died, plunging them into absolute suffocating darkness. "Torrin!" Titus cried out. "I can't see!" Torrin wailed. "It's dark! The monsters are in the dark!" The boys stopped moving. They were paralyzed. The darkness of the mine was usually frightening, but this was the heavy, total blackness of a tomb. Stellan felt them huddling together, shaking. He could smell their terror, sour and sharp. "Kaia," Stellan said calmly, "do you know the way by touch?" "Yes," Kaia's voice came from the black. "I can feel the airflow." "Good. Keep moving. I have the boys." Stellan sheathed his sword. He knelt in the dark. He couldn't see his sons, but his other senses were heightened. He felt their heat signatures. He heard their panicked breathing. "Torrin," Stellan said. His voice was deep, vibrating through the floorboards. "Titus, Talon, listen to me." The crying stopped, replaced by sniffling. "You are afraid of the dark," Stellan said. "That is because you think you are prey. Prey fears the dark because it hides the hunter." He reached out and found Torrin's shoulder. He squeezed it firmly. "But you are not prey. You are the winter blood. We do not fear the cold, and we do not fear the dark." Stellan closed his eyes and let his alpha aura flare. He didn't summon ice this time. He summoned light. It wasn't a spell. It was the bioluminescence of his eyes. He opened them wide. In the pitch black, two orbs of brilliant, glowing blue fire appeared. They cast a soft, ethereal light, illuminating the terrified faces of the triplets. "Look at me," Stellan commanded softly. The boys stared at his glowing eyes. They were mesmerized. "Your eyes do the same thing," Stellan told them. "You just have to let them. Push the fear down. Let the wolf up." Titus blinked. He took a deep breath. Slowly, faintly, a pale blue glimmer sparked in his own eyes. Then Torrin, then Talon. 3 pairs of small, glowing blue eyes lit up the tunnel like fireflies. "Cool," Talon whispered. "We are the things that go bump in the night," Stellan whispered back, a fierce pride swelling in his chest. "Now, follow your mother. Run!" They ran. Guided by their own light, they scrambled through the dark tunnels. They burst into a large cavern. This was the junction, a massive, hollowed-out chamber where several shafts met. In the center stood the rusted iron cage of the manual elevator. "There!" Kaia pointed. "Get in!" They sprinted across the rocky floor. But as they reached the middle of the room, floodlights blinded them. Click! High-powered halogen lights snapped on from the catwalks above, flooding the cavern with harsh white glare. Stellan threw his arm up to shield his eyes. Kaia pulled the boys behind her. "Going somewhere, Your Majesty?" The voice was amplified, echoing off the stone walls. Lady Sybil stood on a metal gantry 30 feet above them. She was no longer feigning the concerned advisor. She was dressed in tactical gear, holding a remote detonator. Around the perimeter of the cavern, 24 mercenaries leveled crossbows and rifles at the family in the center. "Sybil!" Stellan roared, stepping in front of Kaia and the triplets. "This ends now. Lay down your arms, and I will grant you a quick death." "You are in no position to bargain, Stellan," Sybil laughed. It was a brittle, manic sound. "You are buried under a mile of rock. No one knows you are here. The official report will say there was a tragic gas explosion during your inspection, a hero's death. How fitting. You would kill your king?" Stellan challenged, scanning the room for an exit. The elevator was too far. They were exposed. "I am saving the kingdom from a mongrel line," Sybil spat, looking at the boys. "Look at them! Filth! Raised in the dirt. They are not fit to sit on the ice throne." "They are more worthy than you will ever be," Kaia shouted, her voice ringing clear. "They know what it means to survive. You only know how to steal." Sybil's face twisted in ugly rage. She raised the detonator. "Goodbye, Kaia. You should have stayed dead." She pressed the button. Boom, boom, boom. Charges planted along the support pillars of the cavern detonated in sequence. The ceiling of the cavern, millions of tons of rock and unstable shale, cracked. A groan, louder than any beast, tore through the earth. The roof began to come down. "Cover them!" Stellan screamed. He knew he couldn't run. The rocks were falling too fast. Massive boulders the size of carriages were plummeting toward them. Kaia grabbed the boys and threw them into a small depression in the floor, a shallow pit used for water drainage. She curled her body over them, but it wasn't enough. A slab of rock the size of a house was falling directly over their position. It would crush them all instantly. Stellan looked at the rock. He looked at his family. He didn't hesitate. He didn't use his ice sword. He didn't use a shield spell. He let the wolf out. "Roar!" Stellan threw his head back and screamed. His body exploded in a blinding flash of white light. His bones cracked and reshaped in a millisecond. The man vanished. In his place stood the white wolf. He was colossal, a beast of legend. He stood 12 feet tall at the shoulder, his fur thick and shimmering like diamond dust. His jaws were massive enough to crush a horse. His eyes were twin suns of blue fire. The white wolf didn't attack the enemy. He leaped over Kaia and the pups. He planted his massive paws on the ground, bracing his legs. He arched his spine, creating a living canopy over the depression where his family lay. The ceiling hit him. Crash! The sound was sickening. The massive slab of rock slammed into the wolf's back. Stellan snarled, his legs buckling under the unimaginable weight. The rock weighed tons. It should have snapped his spine like a dry twig, but the winter blood was strong, and a father's will was stronger. "Hold!" The wolf roared, pushing back against the mountain. His claws dug furrows into the granite floor. His muscles trembled, coiled like steel cables about to snap. Blood sprayed from his nose as the pressure burst capillaries in his snout. But he held. Dust and smaller rocks rained down, burying them in darkness. But the main slab, the killer, was held aloft by the living pillar of the white wolf. The cavern collapsed around them. The lights were smashed. The mercenaries on the catwalk screamed as their perches disintegrated. Sybil fled, sealing the exit behind her. Silence fell over the black hollow mine. Total, crushing silence. Under the mountain of rubble, in a small pocket of air preserved by a furry white wall, a small voice whispered, "Mama?" Talon squeaked, "Is the giant okay?" Kaia coughed, wiping dust from her eyes. She looked up. In the pitch black, she saw 2 glowing blue eyes staring down at her. They were strained, filled with pain, but they were open. The wolf whined low in his throat. He couldn't move. He was the only thing holding the ceiling up. If he shifted back, they would be crushed. If he fainted, they would be crushed. He was the atlas of their world now. "He is okay, baby," Kaia whispered, reaching up to touch the wolf's trembling muzzle. "He is holding the sky for us." Stellan let out a huff of breath, warm and smelling of pine, washing over his sons. He dug his claws deeper into the rock. He wasn't going anywhere. He would hold this rock for 1,000 years if he had to. because for the first time in his life, the king had something worth dying for. Time loses its meaning when you are buried alive. In the pitch-black pocket of air beneath the collapsed mountain, minutes stretched into hours. The only sound was the strained, wet rasp of the white wolf's breathing and the occasional terrifying groan of the rock slab settling deeper onto his shoulders. Stellan's wolf form was trembling violently. The adrenaline that had allowed him to catch the falling ceiling was fading, replaced by the sheer, crushing reality of physics. Tons of granite pressed down on his spine. His paws were slipping in his own blood where the claws had torn from the bedrock. He was burning up, his internal temperature skyrocketing as his muscles fought against failure. Underneath the arch of his massive belly, Kaia huddled with the triplets. It was hot, smelling of ozone and wet fur. "Is he dying?" Titus whispered, reaching up to touch the wolf's heaving flank. "No," Kaia said fiercely, though she was terrified. She wiped the sweat from her forehead, leaving a streak of cold mud. "He is fighting. He is the strongest thing in the world." She crawled closer to Stellan's massive head. His eyes were squeezed shut, teeth bared in a rictus of exertion. "Stellan," Kaia whispered, placing her hand on his snout. "Can you hear me?" The wolf's ear twitched. One blue eye cracked open, rolling to look at her. It was filled with pain, but also a deep, abiding softness. "You have to hold on," Kaia pleaded. "Miller will get the loyal guards. They are digging. I can hear them." From high above, muffled through layers of rock, came the faint thump, thump, thump of heavy machinery. The rescue drills. Stellan huffed a breath that ruffled Kaia's hair. He couldn't speak, but the bond between them, dormant for 5 years, was wide open now. Kaia could feel his thoughts bleeding into hers. "I am sorry." The voice in her head was heavy and slow. "I didn't know." "I know," Kaia wept, resting her forehead against his fur. "I should have told you. I was just so afraid." "My sons," Stellan's mind whispered. "They are perfect." "They are troublemakers," Kaia laughed through her tears. "Torin eats dirt. Talon bites. Titus thinks he's a wizard." The wolf let out a sound that might have been a chuckle, if it hadn't been crushed by a whimper of pain as the rock shifted. "Tell us a story, Mama," Talon whispered, burying his face in Stellan's fur, "to make the dark go away." Kaia looked at her boys, huddled against the father they had just met. "Once upon a time," Kaia began, her voice steadying, "there was a king of ice who lived in a glass castle. He was lonely and cold, but then he found 3 little bear cubs in a coal mine." "Wolf cubs," Stellan's mind corrected gently. 3 little wolf cubs," Kaia smiled, and he realized that the coal didn't make them dirty. It just made them strong diamonds waiting to be polished. For 3 hours, Stellan held the mountain. He held it until his vision went black. He held it until his muscles tore. He held it because every time he thought about letting go, he felt a small hand patting his leg or heard a small sneeze from the dust. Then light broke through. A diamond-tipped drill bit punched through the darkness above, followed by a shaft of blinding sunlight. "I see white fur," a voice shouted from above. "The king, he is holding the collapse." "Heave! Get the jacks under the slab! Move!" The sound of hydraulic jacks whirring to life filled the cavern. Metal groaned against stone. Slowly, agonizingly, the crushing weight began to lift from Stellan's back. The moment the weight was gone, Stellan's legs gave out. The massive white wolf collapsed to the stone floor, panting, his tongue lolling out. "Papa!" Torrin cried, rushing to him. The royal guard, their armor shining in the flashlight beams, dropped into the hole. They were led by Captain Vane, Stellan's second-in-command. "Secure the perimeter!" Vane shouted. "Medics! The king is down!" Stellan growled low in his throat. He forced himself to shift. The white fur receded, revealing the battered, bleeding form of the man. Stellan lay in the dirt, his dragon-scale armor ruined, his back a mass of bruises. He pushed the medics away. "The boys," Stellan rasped, pointing a shaking hand at Kaia and the triplets. "Get them out first." "Sire, you're back," the medic started. "I said get them out," Stellan roared, though it came out as a cough. The guards gently lifted the boys and Kaia into the rescue harnesses. Stellan insisted on going last. He would not leave the hole until his pack was safe. On the surface, the scene was chaotic. The entire mining colony had gathered around the main shaft entrance. 3,000 workers stood in silence, watching the rescue operation. Standing on a raised platform near the pit head was Lady Sybil. She had wiped the soot from her face and donned a fresh cloak of mourning black. She stood with her hands clasped, looking distraught. "It is a tragedy," Sybil was telling the assembled press and mining guild leaders. "A gas pocket. The king insisted on going in alone to save a worker, a hero's death. But we must look to the future, to the succession. Since Stellan had no known heirs, the succession would fall to the council, which Sybil controlled. "The king is dead," Sybil announced, bowing her head. "Long live the council." "Not today, witch." The voice was rough, broken, but it carried the unmistakable weight of the crown. Sybil's head snapped up. Emerging from the smoke and dust of the rescue lift was not a corpse. It was King Stellan Frost. He was leaning heavily on Captain Vane, limping, his chest bare and bandaged, covered in blood and coal dust. But he was alive, and he was furious. The crowd gasped. A ripple of whispers turned into a roar of relief. Stellan pushed Vane away. He stood on his own power, swaying slightly. He walked out onto the platform. He didn't walk alone. Kaia walked beside him, her head high, holding the hands of Torrin and Titus. Talon walked in front, clinging to Stellan's leg. They were filthy. They looked like refugees. Sybil stepped back, her face draining of color. "Stellan, sire, I thought—" "You thought you buried us," Stellan said, his voice projecting across the silent crowd. "You thought that rocks could kill the winter blood." He looked down at the triplets. The sun was high in the sky now. The bright, unfiltered winter sun hit the boys for the first time in their lives. "It's bright," Titus complained, squinting. Stellan reached down. He took the hem of his ruined cloak and gently wiped Titus's face. He wiped away the layers of coal dust, the grease, the disguise. He revealed the pale porcelain skin underneath. He wiped the soot from their hair, and the silver shone through like a beacon, reflecting the sunlight so brightly it hurt to look at. The crowd went silent. Silver hair, the mark of the kings. But Sybil tried one last desperate gambit. "Bastards!" she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger. "They are mongrel bastards! Look at them! Dirty mine rat bastards! They are not royalty. That woman is a whore who bewitched him." The crowd murmured. Doubt rippled through them. Hair could be dyed. Eyes could be glamored. Stellan smiled. He looked up at the sun. He knew what was coming. The transition from the dark mine to the bright, cold surface air was a shock to the system. The boys' noses twitched. Talon tilted his head back. Ah. Torrin scrunched his nose. Ah. Titus blinked rapidly. Ah. The entire mining colony leaned in. Achoo! 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 3 perfect, triple staccato sneezes rang out in perfect unison. Snap, 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 like a volley of firecrackers. It was the thunder sneeze, the genetic signature that could not be faked, the sound that had echoed in the Frost throne room for 1,000 years. The silence broke. Old Man Miller threw his hat in the air. "The princes!" he shouted. "The winter princes!" The miners cheered. They roared. They stamped their feet. Stellan looked at Sybil. She was shrinking away, looking for an exit, but the royal guard had already encircled her. "The bloodline is pure," Stellan announced, his voice cold as the grave, "and it is strong." He pointed at Sybil. "You sentenced a mother and her children to the dark," Stellan said. "You believed the mines were a fitting place for them." Sybil fell to her knees. "Sire, please, I did it for the kingdom." "Mercy!" "I am a merciful king," Stellan agreed. "I will not execute you." He gestured to the open mine shaft, the elevator cage that was waiting to descend for the next shift. "But the coal must be mined, and we are short-handed." "No!" Sybil gasped. "No, I am a lady. I cannot work." "You can." Kaia stepped forward. She tossed a pair of scratched, dirty goggles at Sybil's feet. "The quota is 2 tons a day. If you don't make it, you don't eat. That was the rule you set for us." "Take her down," Stellan commanded. Sybil screamed as the guards dragged her into the cage. The door clanged shut. The cage began to descend, taking the spy master down into the darkness she had tried to weaponize. Stellan turned to Kaia. He took her rough, scarred hand in his. He lifted it to his lips and kissed the coal-stained knuckles. "Let's go home," Stellan whispered. 1 month later. The Winter Palace was no longer quiet. The pristine white halls echoed with the sound of running feet and crashing vases. Servants ran back and forth, looking exhausted but happy. In the royal garden, the snow lay thick and white. Stellan Frost sat on a stone bench wrapped in furs, his back still healing but strong. Kaia sat beside him, wearing a gown of midnight blue velvet, a silver crown resting lightly on her head. She looked like a queen, but she still carried a small pouch of coal dust in her pocket, just in case. "Watch this!" Talon shouted. The 3 boys, dressed in miniature fur-lined coats, were building a snow fort. Their silver hair was bright against the snow. Their blue eyes sparkled with mischief. They were no longer mice. They were wolves. Titus gathered a ball of snow. He concentrated. His eyes glowed blue. Poof! The snowball turned into a ball of solid ice. "I did it!" Titus cheered. "I made ice!" "Beginner's luck!" Torrin laughed, tackling him. Stellan watched them wrestle in the snow. He felt the warmth of Kaia's hand in his. He felt the fullness of his heart, which had been empty for so long. He leaned over and kissed his queen. "Thank you," he whispered against her lips. "For what?" Kaia smiled. "For hiding them," Stellan said, looking at his sons. "For keeping them safe until I was strong enough to deserve them." Talon ran over to them, his nose pink from the cold. He looked up at his father. His nose twitched. Stellan smiled. He felt a tickle in his own nose. They looked at each other, father and son. "Achoo! Achoo! Achoo!" They sneezed in perfect unison. Kaia laughed, the sound ringing out like bells in the winter air. The dark days of the mine were gone. The winter blood had returned, loud, proud, and sneezing, ready to rule for 1,000 years.